research in his book that you all are familiar with called The Lost Tribe of Israel, History of Beth, was influential and encouraged the work of Oxford geneticist David Goldstein, who after hearing stories of a tribe of black Africans called Olympus, who live in South Africa and Zimbabwe, and in a long time claimed to be descendants of the house of Israel. They said that they fled to Yemen, and particularly to Sodom, after the Roman domination of Israel began, when Pompey Magnus entered Jerusalem with Roman legions in 63 before the Common Era. They traveled down Africa, and they had settled into Yemen. Later on, as we know, Muslims and Christians conquest of Yemen caused them to have to leave again. As refugees, they came down and ended up in what we now call Zimbabwe and the land of Africa. Dr. Goldstein discovered during his research of checking the genetic markers of the Jewish people, he understood and said that it was discovered that the genes, particularly of the Buba clan in particular, have been traced to Kohanim, who were descendants of Carey, the brother of Moses. So we had to pray that Rabbi is having a good time down there, educating those people. We're happy to see all of you all. I'm happy to see everybody here that made it out today. Changing weather conditions. Snow one day, 40 degrees the next, rain the next. Now it's going to drop back down to freezing. But we're happy to be alive and experience it. You know, unfortunately, we were expecting some guests today. They did not come. But that's okay. Because we're here with an understanding that we seek to encourage and to recognize among all faiths that we have more in common than not. And our differences should never be greater than our desire to strive for justice where there is none. Show compassion when it's needed. Those who have poverty of spirit, those who lack material needs to sustain a dignified life. So our goal together is to make this world a better one than the one we entered. As Malik Al-Haj Shabazz said, I am willing to work with anybody to change these miserable conditions we find in this world. I don't care what color they are. That is why these miserable conditions in the world, as you look around, you see what they have caused. They call protesters in Ukraine to rise up and say, we are not being taken care of. The government is corrupt. The people don't have jobs. They're rising up in Venezuela, in Turkey, in Egypt, in Guinea, in Nigeria, in Myanmar, in Syria, and yes, even right here in America. You see, we're living in a time that the haves are not willing to share with the have-nots. You can call it greed, or you can call it globalization. It doesn't matter, because it's hard to stand by in any country and see the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the divide wider. Whether it is tribal, cronyism, ethnic cronyism, class cronyism, one-party state cronyism, or two-party state cronyism, religious or sectarian cronyism, they all foster ill in the society where loyalty to man supersedes loyalty to God. You know, Dr. King spoke of this. He asked, when he spoke, and it's called Conscience, he said, a genuine revolution of values means in the final analysis that our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. What we see today is everyone wants something for their section. They don't care about you. They don't care about the next person. And that's a sad state of being. I don't know where we've been. But every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole. If not, we will not be able to preserve the order that we find in these societies. Any nation that spends more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. You see, our greatest defense is the offensive actions that we take on behalf of justice. We must elevate the righteousness of our thoughts, our minds, and our actions to a higher level. If we have more concern where we will spend eternity than concern for the social conditions of our brothers and sisters on earth, we are out of balance. Show me a man or a woman that is helping to address the needs of the orphan, the widow, the stranger, and I'll show you a person that is feeding his spiritual strength. He is feeding his spiritual strength. For as one first century writer asked the question, he said, how can you say you love God whom you have never seen, and walk past your brother who's a living that you see every day? You walk past the homeless brother and look at it with awe. You walk past the home and they ask you something and you look at them with a blank stare. You see your unemployed sisters and uninsured families and malnourished children. You read about it every day. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. The soil in which terrorism plants the seed of hatred and destruction must be overturned by removing the conditions of poverty, oppressive rule, inequality, and unjust government. President John F. Kennedy, he said, those who make peaceful change impossible makes violent change inevitable. And that is what you see in the world today. And I, for one, believe in a non-violent revolution, and I call for a radical change of value, where profit motive and privilege and pleasure no longer rules over the importance of the needs of the masses. Today's portion is called Vayakhel, meaning and he assembled. Our sages taught us that this assembly took place the day after what would become Yom Kippur. This is the second time in which Moses went up into the mountains. This time he went to atone for Israel's sin of making the golden calf. And he returned with a second set of tables. But when Moses came down, he brought down not only with him the 2 tables of stone, but the ultimate gift of God, which is his forgiveness. Israel's building of the golden calf was an affirmation of the deeply rooted psychological effects of slavery. They could not understand what their freedom was or what they could do with that freedom. They were physically free, but mentally they remained in bondage. And when you find the people conditioned in that manner, you can expect them to cling to only that. You know, Harriet Tubman, she best described it when she spoke of 300 trips she made to help free Africans during the chattel slavery in America. I said Africans, not African Americans, because the 14th Amendment hadn't even been passed yet. You were still looked at as 3/4 of a person. Chattel means capital, and that's how you treat it. She said, I could have freed more, but I couldn't convince them that they were slaves. I could have freed more, but I couldn't convince them of the horrid condition that they was in. I couldn't convince them that that's not the way God intended for you to live. I couldn't convince talking to people, he begins the conversation saying, these are the words that the Lord God has commanded. Moses establishes with them first, this is not about me. Whether I'm gone 40 days or 100 days, it doesn't matter. Because in the end, the ultimate responsibility is yours. How you establish your relationship with God. Yes. I did not create you. I am only an instrument of God. And he alone is to be worshipped. Yes. The first thing you should always remind of God is the Sabbath. Amen. You see, 6 days, the scriptures start off, 6 days shall work be done. He's telling you Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 6 days shall work be done. But on Saturday is the Sabbath. On it, you was to do as your Creator did after the creation, which was to rest. You see, and let me say, we're not having a fundamentalist view of God creating heaven and earth in 6 24-hour days. Particularly when the sun and moon ain't created till the 4th day. So how much time took for those 3 days? So we don't know how long it took God to create. It could have been a million, billion, trillion years. That could be a day to God. It's not in your understanding. You see, this repetition that we do each week is to remind us of the omnipotence of God and free you from any notion that a man is to be worshipped as Pharaoh was in Egypt, or to worship any of the sun, the stars, the moons, or any physical substance. Moses was reminding the people that your destiny is not controlled by man. Thank you. Or astrology, or a belief in anything other than the one God who created the universe and all that is in it. First, in order to serve God, you must eliminate fear, ignorance, and superstition. Because that is what calls you to build an object of worship or an intercessor object of worship after leaving Egypt. Second, you must take time to reflect. What does God require of me? What does God require of us? If we spend all our time focusing on work or play, when do we have time to consider our relationship to God? And what he or she means in our lives? When all our time is spent thinking about work or making money, other things in our life go back and they suffer. Relationships suffer. Relationships are lost. Divorces become common, whether it's between spouses, between the parents and children, siblings and friends. You don't see them. You don't have any interaction with them. And over time, something is lost. You know, I don't know who turned the coin. I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. Some say it was Shakespeare. Some say it was Machiavelli Wright. I think it was Cool Monique. But please, do not tell me it was Lil Wayne. You see, when our minds are inundated with making money, medical attention. I love the work they do because they teach us that the community is bigger than where we live. But charity starts at home. So seek out and volunteer to help for organizations promoting social services such as tutoring at school programs, passing out needles to addicts and AIDS victims who need it. You know, I like to say, social services has so many drastic cuts in programs in this state. Organizations providing some form of safety net need all the volunteer help they can receive. That is why this portion, the building of the Mishkan, required everyone to participate. You see, the term Mishkan means dwelling. It refers to the portable desert sanctuary called Tent of Reunion, or the Tent of Meeting. In Hebrew, we call it Moreh. This is where God spoke to Moses face to face. Not literally. It's an anthropomorphism, meaning Moses received revelation directly from God. And when those who wanted to consult God, they went to the tent of meetings, to the door of the tent of meetings, and he would consult with them. When the sisters, the daughters of Zelophehad, what did they do? They came to Moses. Moses said, I can't answer this question right now. Let me go and consult with you. And I'll come back and answer for you. He goes to the tent of reunion. He goes to the tent of meeting. He comes back. It's interesting because the same term, Mishkan, when translated by Shalom in the Vulgate, he used the term tabernacle when speaking of the Mishkan. But it was built for God who resides in heaven when he came to visit on earth and be among his people, Israel. His appearance was a cloud that covered the entrance and traveled above us by day and by fire by night. There are two traditions on where the Mishkan was located. And it's interesting because they show you why Israel was so emphatic about maintaining ritual views. The Elohistic writings tell us in Exodus 33 and 7, it tells us that the Mishkan stood outside the camp, while the priestly writings tell us it stood in the middle of the camp. That's in Numbers 2 and 2, where it says all the tribes had their buildings surrounding the Mishkan, because that's where God dwells with us. The construction and the erection of the tabernacle was made according to specific plans. That was from the sockets that formed the base, foundation of the temple, to the curtains that hung in the holies of holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. You see, this entire endeavor was funded by everyone equally, young and old, rich and poor, through the half-shekel offering that was required when men reached the age of the military age of 20. Now this half-shekel at later times became a tax to maintain the public worship service. That is why we are told, what the scripture says, the rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than a half-shekel when given in offering. All were equal. Now, when you understand about the military aspect, the next question is, did women help that they did for the building of the tabernacle? Certainly, they did. In the 35th chapter, 22nd verse, it says what? And they came, both men and women, as many were of willing hearts. And they brought nose rings and earrings and signet rings and girdles and all the jewels of gold. The women gave. And I can imagine that, like the three little children here dancing to the music. Those little children were observing their parents. I'm willing to bet that they had something in their pocket, they put it up in there too. Because they were learning from their was a fine linen that hung and flowed throughout the inside of the tabernacle. Let me say here, without the strength of our women, this synagogue and synagogues throughout the city and nation would have long ceased to exist. It is the strength of our women that has helped maintain our synagogues. You know, it's interesting that when we look at that, because a lot of times they seem to be forgotten. So I'm going to tell you brothers right now, join me so we can say thank you and thank God for the women He has given us. That is why this congregation has stepped outside of the tradition of our Orthodox conservative brothers and sisters and said our women must have equal roles of participation in the synagogue. Now, I know you sit men on one side, women on the other side, but don't get that, don't misunderstand that. That's a tradition. That's our tradition. And we uphold our tradition. But we do believe in egalitarianism among the people, women, and men here. So, I say to you, if you look at things in the communities in which we live, we see the strength of women in various ways. Dwight Hopkins has a wonderful book called Heads and Hearts, where he has a whole section on the significant contribution of black women that they've had and continue to have on the black church. The idea of equality was an essential ingredient in the establishment of God's house. Moses chose 2 master architects to oversee its construction. It is important to note in verse 30 and 34. It said, "See, the Lord hath called by name Beth-Zalel, the son of Moreh, the son of Carey, of the tribe of Judah. Both he and Oholiab, the son of Ahishamach, of the tribe of Dan. Them has he filled with wisdom of all manner of workmanship, and of those that devise skill and tasks." The significance of this is important because God sets the precedent in Israel. In that Bezalel was from the most important and most prominent tribe, ancient Judah. He's from an extremely influential family. According to Josephus in Antiquities, in the 3rd book, in section 2 and 4, he informs us that his father, was the husband of Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Moses and Aaron. So he comes from a prominent family. Is one of the men that holds up the arms of Moses, while Aaron held the other side arm when we fought against the Amalekites. And that was when we defeated them. Was also what? He was the one that was killed by the children of Israel when he tried to stop them from building the golden calf. So you can see that Bezalel came from a very distinct and prominent family. But on the other hand, let's look at his partner, who has the same skills. Oholiab. He came from the lowest tribe, the tribe of Dan, the tribe of Dan. His mother was Bilhah. Bilhah means simple. Give you a description. Why? You see, Bilhah was a servant of Rachel. They didn't have the word slave back then because the word slave comes from the word Slavs, which was based on the Europe. So when you say servant, it's a very nice way of saying and describing it. But she was a servant to Rachel, and Rachel gave her to her husband to have children whom she could not bear any. And when the child was born, who named the child? Not Bilhah, Rachel. Because he gave both of them the intelligence and made both of them, and in picking both of them to be the architects of the building, his tabernacle, he gave you an understanding, the foundation, that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who you come from. I can choose who I want, and it will be on equal basis. So he took from the lowest and to the highest and said, that is who will build my team. Is equality. And so we understand that it's not about status. It's about service. None of us is above another of us. None of us is below another. All of us is essential to this community. Our single uniqueness is nothing unless we become a part of that whole life. We were all created equally by God. We will all perish and go back to God. You see, death is the greatest equalizer known to man. He takes everything. We were here. And while we're here, in this life, in this world, let us spend our energy to build a tabernacle, to build community, in which all humanity can come and be welcome, where the vision by dogma and doctrine cease from interrupting the building of God's kingdom, so that we can worship our Creator with the oneness of heart and show the kindness and compassion to our fellow man that God has required of us. You know, this is the last Sabbath that we have in Black History Month. The end of Black History Month is here. And as we near, unfortunately, like you all who have cable, little Poe Dan, I ain't got a 2579 32 and hope I ain't working at it. So you know I get bombarded with the Dr. King I Have a Dream speech on particular channel 9. This is where Dr. King described his vision of the tabernacle, all of God's things. You all know the standard lines of the speech. They play them all the time, so much that they have become rote and meaningless to this present generation and the nation at large. He says, we will speed up the day when all God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing the words of that old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. I said, I hear that all the time. That's it. Dr. King picture flash up. No, that's the image in which we would have. Of course, this can be deceptive. You see, I went home, and I went to the home of a client the other day. Children were being removed, not because she was so much of a neglected mother, but because she was poor. She had a slum landlord who did not reach the first. So she had no heat in her home during this blistering cold. One of the kids had scabies, which was what the school reported, which is why we came in. So they took the kids and they placed them in foster care. I had supervised visitation. When I had the children with me, I began to talk to the younger son about Dr. King holiday and the reason why he didn't have to go to school that day. This kid is 6 years old, almost 7. And he thought that Dr. King was a white man. This little black child thought that the man who was of his nation, who was to be encouragement to him, who was to be the face of intellectual, of steadfastness, and the picture of the man of God, to him, of his people, he thought was white. And so I asked myself, how could this be in the 21st century, when we have all kinds of apparatuses, social media, television, brothers like our seniors, our elder Moreh, elder Moshe, who is consistent. The one thing, somebody said, Dan, you don't be in Moshe's class? I said, I don't get a day, I got to try to get home sometime and do what I have to do, prepare for the week. But the one thing that you don't know is the brother teaches me, not by words, but by his actions, that he is consistent. And so I seek to be consistent. And in that consistency, he culturally is informed us from week to week. That's a blessing for us, because our children are not in. I picked up the speech when I went home and thought about what the child had said. And so I picked up the speech that Dr. King gave in Washington, D.C., August 28, 1963. This was the day after we lost one of the greatest intellectual giants our nation had ever known. That previous night in Ghana, W.E. Du Bois passed away. They played the end of that speech, and we hear it all the time. Yes, you know, black kids might go march hand in hand. And we say, yeah, that's right. But I was reminded that we will never build that tabernacle that Dr. King spoke of unless we address the first part of his speech, which is rarely heard. You see, we only want to hear the smooth things which fits into our political correctness. But Dr. King said, we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. The condition that our people were in was a shameful condition. In the land that spoke of freedom, democracy, and equality. In a sense, he says, we've come to the nation's capital to cash a check. America has given the Negro a bad check. A check that has come back marked insufficient funds. You see, we have come a long way. And we even have a black man in the White House. But the check is still coming back insufficient funds. You see, the prominent social scientist, William Julius Wilson, has a book out called When Work Disappears. It depicts the world of the new urban poor, where joblessness is having a devastating effect on the African American community. It is causing problems in every aspect and things you don't even think about. I want to tell you, we have more unemployed today than we was in '64. Let me tell you something. This class divide is growing worse than when Johnson, President Lyndon Johnson, declared war on poverty. So Dr. Wilson's book speaks of this. It talks about this. And it talks about how this system is producing an uneducated population in our community that is not going to be prepared for the jobs that are required